So this is a guy, a YouTuber, who is documenting his performance of the game, or his playing of the game, in Norwich last year. And I just want to kind of bring your attention to here. So if you notice, he's in Castle Meadow at this point, and notably on his screen on the left-hand side, that's the castle. Those are all the Pokestops, and I'm going to kind of touch upon that in a little while as well. One of the other things I was kind of interested in, particularly when researching this game, was about it as a cultural phenomenon. You know, there was a period, there was probably about a month, 6-week period during last summer where Pokémon Go was absolutely everywhere. It was in the news, it was in medical journals, it was on the television, and we'd see lots of kind of notices like this go viral. So this is from an animal shelter in the US, which is saying, look, if you want to come and walk, if you want to go on a Pokemon Go walk, why not come and walk a dog at the same time? Take our dogs out of the shelter and walk them around the block and catch Pokemon at the same time. So do something good as you're playing the game. This is a photo I took at London Liverpool Street in August, saying to people, hey, if you're going to play Pokemon Go, just be careful because this is a train station and you might die. So consider the following, you know, be respectful of other station users. Don't risk going onto the tracks just for a game. Be aware of your surroundings. Familiarise yourselves with the warning signs and barriers, etc. We also saw viral videos like this of stampedes emerging when a particular Pokemon would appear. So I think this is, a Snorlax appearing in Central Park in New York. And thousands of people were playing like this. And I think I did the same when I discovered there was a Snorlax on London Street, and I was in the Garnet, and I literally ran out of the pub to go and catch my Snorlax. And we also saw videos. There was a video that went viral on Instagram of Justin Bieber among these hordes, but he didn't get recognised. Justin Bieber was out playing Pokemon Go, trying to catch a Vaporeon, and he didn't get recognised either. It was completely crazy. So this is a sense of what Pokemon Go fever was like during the summer of last year. And I saw this tweet back in January, you know, I really missed that month when Pokemon Go came out. I feel like that was the happiest everyone had been for a while. Everyone was out loving life. And it really did seem to be the case. And I was very much kind of interested in that as a researcher, but also as a player as well, because I was a Pokemon Go player and I was out in Norwich every night for about 3 weeks. And I just found it really fascinating that there were all these people out doing the same thing. So I'm an audience researcher by trade. So generally speaking, the kind of research I do is speaking to people about their consumption of media. And typically speaking, that's around film and television. So I've been involved with research projects that look at audiences and fans of Alien, of Star Wars, of Game of Thrones. So I'm very much interested in what people do with the kind of the media they love. And so I decided to kind of quickly turn around a research project based on people's use of Pokemon Go in Norwich specifically, because I saw that there was something very, very interesting happening. There were groups of people, and you could tell if you were a Pokemon Go player in Norwich last summer, you could tell who else was playing Pokemon. You could see the people out on the streets. And I thought, this is really interesting. I want to know what is motivating these people to come out here. Because as an audience researcher, part of what I like to try and do is try and give a voice to the people who are using that media. So you might often see kind of reports in the newspapers about what people think about a certain film or TV show or video game. What are these people doing? You know, the Daily Mail might try and explain what you are doing out in the city when you're playing Pokemon Go. And oftentimes that's based on kind of on biases, on prejudice, and on kind of preconceived notions of what people are, of what video gamers perhaps are actually like. So I went out onto the streets of Norwich with a mission to talk to people about why they were playing Pokemon Go. And so here were the questions that I asked. So I asked people, well, what is the general appeal of Pokemon Go? Why are you out here right now? To what extent are you playing this game as part of your regular routine? Is it part of a walk to work? Is it part of just a lunch hour thing? Or are you checking it obsessively throughout the day? How important is social interaction to your enjoyment of the game? Is it something that you're playing with other people, with friends, with strangers, or on your own? Has playing the game had an impact on your day-to-day life? And can the popularity of the game tell us anything about British culture in 2016? Was there anything about the shape of the world at that particular time that was prompting dozens of people to go out, hundreds of people perhaps, to go out into Norwich city centre after dark to play a game like this? So over 3 days in July, I spoke with 28 people in 17 separate interviews and amassed a whole bunch of data. And I'm going to share with you some of my findings from that today. So some of it is the words that these people spoke. So I recorded all the interviews and I had them transcribed. Some of it is in relation to some academic theory. I'll try and breeze over that, but I think it's useful to know how someone like myself will approach the study of work like this. Generally speaking, then, here were some of the findings that I found. Well, first of all, there was an acute nostalgia for the Pokémon franchise. So the youngest person I interviewed was 18 years old, and the oldest person I interviewed was 48, and in fact that was mother and son going out and playing it together. But the average age of my participants was 26. And that's kind of important in the way in which the appeal of the game was referenced. With most participants being in their mid-20s, they would have been around 10 years old when the first Pokemon games were released in the UK on the Game Boy in 1999. So there's a kind of a peak age for nostalgia for that franchise, of remembering something from your childhood and saying, hey, I remember this, and I want to play it again now. People were very positive about the game in terms of their mental and physical health. People spoke about the fact that, hey, it's getting me out walking for a change, and people are starting to measure their steps on their phone apps to kind of see how far and how much they've walked over the preceding 24 hours. People were also talking about kind of mental health, the fact that getting outside, getting your vitamin D, being in the sunshine, is getting people away from your dark rooms where you might be playing video games in front of the screens. It's getting people who might be suffering from depression, for example, out and about and feeling good about themselves. And also the idea about sociality between both friends and strangers. Pokémon Go was seen as a safe group activity. It was an alternative to the norm of watching TV. It was free, which was a big bonus. And it kind of acted as a social lubricant. People going to the pub and playing Pokemon Go was something that was frequently mentioned as well. So I'm just going to kind of speak very, very briefly, because I don't want to be too boring, but about the idea about how mobile games have been theorized in academic terms. Because there is something about the fact that you can take this game out of your pocket, you're on your phone, and you're walking around. And that's different to how you'd usually play games. You'd usually be sat in front of the television with your control pad, and you're not going to see the outside world at all. So first of all, we have this idea that Hjorth talks about the idea of holding a phone and being what's called a phoneur. So he bridges on this old kind of idea from the 19th century called the flaneur. The flaneur is someone who walks around the city, just takes everything in, and is just the happy wanderer. That's been kind of updated in contemporary terms as the happy wanderer, but now has a phone in their hand. So we can conceptualize people playing mobile games as just holding a phone and just kind of viewing the world through their phone. And, we can see that with or without Pokemon Go. We go upstairs, we go outside into the city, and people are kind of glued to their handsets, and they're texting or they're Instagramming or they're doing whatever. But oftentimes in today's society, people are looking at the world through their phone, quite literally. We then have the idea that Stark, he talks about the idea of mobile gaming, and says that everyday mobility doesn't mean blindly moving from one place to another. So we're not just staring at our phones. What Stark argues is that we are interacting with people, objects, physical structures. We start learning about the place that surrounds us while we have our phone in our hands. So we're not just kind of blindly stumbling into danger, as some of the papers might have you believe, or London Liverpool Street might have you believe. It's about kind of learning something about your environment and discovering new places. We then have the idea about kind of Pokemon Go and mobile games blurring the line between kind of game and reality. So we have a kind of a historical notion of playing games taking place within this magic circle, that there's a kind of a sense of total immersion in the play space, that when you're sat down in front of your television screen, you're completely focused on that game and nothing can kind of snap you out of it. The idea now with these mobile games is that we're both within the real world and also within the play space at the same time. So we're both, it's a fantasy and reality at the same time. So with augmented reality games like Pokemon Go, you're both experiencing the game world and the real world. And that's kind of interesting in the way that technology has changed in the last few years to allow us to do things like that. There's the boundaries between play and non-play are starting to become blurred. And so I want to talk about this kind of in relation to Norwich specifically. Now, quite fortunately for me in framing this research, because I was always interested in how Norwich was framed in Pokemon Go players' framing of the game. But in December 2016, Amazon released their consumer habits report for the year. And this is where they detail shopping trends across the country. So they're like, oh, in Manchester, they bought more Ed Sheeran CDs more than anywhere else in the country. In Devon, they bought more sun hats, things like that. What it turned out, what we in the East had bought more of was portable battery chargers and Pokemon handbooks. So that was a major shopping trend here in the East and in Norwich specifically. So they said that inspired by the Pokemon Go craze of 2016, Norwich residents went wild for Pokemon-related products with sales rocketing during the summer months. This included Pokemon handbooks and DS games. And players hunting for the virtual monsters were draining their batteries as well. This saw a dramatic sales rise in portable battery chargers. And as a result, the EDP declared Norwich the Pokemon Go capital of the UK. And that's very fortunate for me, kind of thinking about Norwich, but we seem to play it more than anybody else. And Norwich certainly was an interesting place to conduct this research. I mean, it's a relatively small city. You can get from one side of the city to the other in about 20 minutes walk. So Pokemon Go activity was quite centralised. So this was an EDP graphic where they said, hey, here's where the best parts to go are. What I found in my research, I was tending to focus on 3 different spots. I was going outside the castle, I was going to the playhouse, and I was also going outside City Hall. And every once in a while, kind of grabbing people who I saw kind of walking between the two. And it became a thing where when I was going up there with my friends, you'd kind of hang around a spot for a little while, catch a few Pokemon, and then move on to the next spot. And, you know, of an evening, you'd see the same groups of people kind of going around and kind of saying hello to everybody. And so, yeah, you'd kind of get the same types of people kind of congregating around these particular areas. And as you will probably know, you know, these hotspots of activity were determined by the presence of gyms and by Pokestops. So we've got a gym there, that's Norwich Castle. We'd also have, you know, the arcade. We'd have the Alan Partridge mural down in Anglia Square. And whilst the significance of these places were determined by Niantic, the developer, based on Ingress. So Niantic made Ingress, which was a similar game to Pokemon Go, and players had to go around to various different locations and catch these portals. And that technology, that architecture was basically ported over for Pokemon Go. So the same kind of significant locations, the same kind of pieces of Norwich interest were ported over from Ingress and then placed within Pokemon Go, and then the Pokemon were placed within that particular location. And so during Ingress, it was said that identifying these landmarks as culturally salient, Ingress players document them and make them visible to others, removing these sites from the mundane landscape of the everyday. And I would argue that in much the same way, the same happened with Pokemon Go. That all of a sudden these same kind of locations that we as citizens of Norwich are so used to seeing, that we just kind of let them pass us by, all of a sudden became a bit more special, because that was the place where you go and pick up Pokemon. And that was kind of interesting to me. So this is one of my, a couple of my respondents who I spoke to kind of about their appeal of Pokemon Go. What did they like about it? So they said, I just like the fact that it uses real-time things and actual locations, rather than just like a fantasy that's made up in a generated world. This is literally just mapping in your area. And their friend said, yeah, I think it's great that it ties in actual touristy things. I mean, you live in a city and you tend to go around quite blindly, really, to what's there. So the idea that you can be living in a city like Norwich all of your life, and all of a sudden a game like Pokemon Go reveals these new places to you that you didn't even know were there. You didn't even recognise them because you just walk past them on your trip to the shops or something like that. Wendy Joyce Darby has said that place is indubitably bound up in personal experience. So our sense of what a place means is very much tied into how you respond to it and your own kind of personal engagement with that place itself. And again, the same thing was kind of coming up with my respondents and what they were saying. So yeah, it's kind of cool because the way this game works, where all the stops are, they're sort of like historical elements. Like Norwich has got a lot of Pokestops per square kilometre, as it were, due to the fact that it's a really historical city. And it's one of the oldest cities in the country. You know, the castle and that sort of thing. And again, that underlying architecture of the game is lifted straight from Ingress, which had its own game mechanic reasons for where those stops were. So it's quite interesting when you're going to the Pokestops, you're exploring the city, you're kind of discovering these things that you might not have noticed, and all these plaques everywhere that you just wouldn't have seen. Yeah, I don't care much about the plaques, but yeah, I'm the sort of person who wouldn't notice that normally. Then you get like, oh, such and such with this plaque, and you might learn something as well. So there's a weirdly, it's kind of vaguely educational in some sense as well. And this kind of educational element of the game, that exploring new spaces because of the game, helps to transform those spaces into something a bit more meaningful. So as Chuan has noted, that what begins as undifferentiated space becomes place as we get to know it better and endow it with value. So these aren't just random streets you're walking past anymore. It's, oh, hey, that's where I caught that Snorlax. That's where I caught that Dragonite. Oh, I know what that street is called now. So all of a sudden, going to these places and having experience there perhaps makes you value it somewhat more. So indeed, the work by some other people on Pokemon Go recently reaffirms the idea of Pokemon as an educational or urban exploration game, that people are likely to use it as motivation to visit somewhere new. And this was reaffirmed by one of my respondents, who said, like the other day, this is really embarrassing. My friend, because we don't live in Norwich, we both live in King's Lynn, but we both work here. We left work at 3 p.m. and did not get home until 2 in the morning because we drove all over the county finding every Pokestop we could. And it actually took us, because all of the Pokestops are like places of interest, it took us to some really cool places we'd never been. Like, we've lived in King's Lynn for years and years and years, and we went to the Borsey Ruins, and we'd never been there before. And that was quite cool. Also, because there was a Dragonite there, which was worth the haul, the 20-minute hike it took up to get the road to find that. So it's going and visiting these new places with the intention of going to find a Dragonite, with the intention of going to find something, a particularly rare or cool Pokemon. This person arguably wouldn't have gone up there for a Drowsy, which are just rife here in Norwich. But finding something rare and having the added bonus of going somewhere new and interesting was an interesting offshoot of this game. So I'm going to look briefly now at kind of how some of those ideas of exploration and impact on the player experience can be viewed through the discussion of one Norwich hotspot, which was the castle. So this castle, I'm sure we all are all familiar with the castle, but it's a Norman castle built as an outpost of the king. This is all stuff, when I'm telling you these facts about Norwich Castle, this is all stuff that I've recently learned as a result of this research. Like, I went to the castle as a child, I'm from Norwich, but I didn't know the history of Norwich, and it's only when I felt like I had to tell other people about it that I've gone off and researched it a little bit and found out a little bit about the history of Norwich, which that's interesting for me as a researcher, that I've had to go through that process of something which I'm very familiar with as part of my research. But yeah, there was a sense that the castle was this kind of very special place of interest. So one of my participants noted that you won't believe it until you see it for yourself. Until you go to Norwich Castle and you see all the players sitting around there. It's kind of amazing how many people are there playing Pokémon Go at the same time. Why do people go there? Because it's almost always got 3 lures on it, so it attracts people like Pokemon. So here's a screenshot of what Norwich Castle looks like on the Pokémon Go interface, and you see this kind of grey mass in the middle. That is Norwich Castle itself. If you sit at the base of Norwich Castle, you can triangulate a position in between 3 different Pokestops. People would drop lures there to attract Pokemon, and so you could sit there and kind of target each of those 3 and just collect Pokemon kind of non-stop until you got bored and went to the next location. And I thought it was really interesting that kind of historically the outside of the castle has been this meeting place. It's been a cattle market as well. There's been a market there as well. You'd have kind of settlements there back in the kind of the very early days. But from this historical position of Norwich Castle being the centre of the city, it almost became the centre of the city again. This is a photo I took last summer, and I think I would say that with the exception of that one woman on the far left side, everyone there is playing Pokemon Go at that point, and that's discounting the people who you can't really see in frame, the people that were next to me. So that was just kind of one sunny lunchtime last summer that you had 40 or 50 people out there on their lunch hour just collecting Pokemon. Everyone's looking at their phone screen. And so we really get a sense there of how people were playing the game, this kind of the distinction between play and reality, that people are in this real life space, but they're also playing the game at the same time. So this is one of my respondents who said, yeah, if you go up to the castle around 11:30 at night, there have always been people who hang out at Norwich Castle. And just as an aside, we may all know that if you go to the castle at about 11:30 at night, you might want to avoid Castle Gardens. It's not the most savoury of places to go to. There's people there kind of now, and it feels more like a safe space. It's ridiculous to say, but I've lived in Norfolk for 11 years now, and before Thursday, this is the first time I've ever been in the Castle Garden. So again, new spaces are being opened up to people through playing this game. It invited new visitors to the site who otherwise might not have been there. In talking about ingress, Stark talks about that mobile games give modifications to player mobility, including where they go, how they behave while they're there, how they move, and encouraging participation in the curation and experience of cultural heritage. And I thought this kind of changing the way in which people move, I thought was very, very interesting. This is a picture that a friend posted of me on Instagram. So that's me kind of right in the center of the frame. That's about 11:30 at night. And we've gone there playing Pokemon Go. And he's laughing at me because what I'm trying to do there is hatch an egg. I had 0.1 kilometers left on a 5k egg, and I really wanted to hatch it, but we were there at the castle. So all I was doing was just walking back and forth, looking at my phone and just walking up and down, until finally something rubbish hatched. It was probably a Pidgey or something like that. But it was just the idea that people's body language changes when they're playing that game. As I said, you could walk around the city and you could look and say, oh, hey, I can tell they're playing Pokemon Go because they're standing there like that. They're trying to kind of hit the Pokeball out. And you could tell the same with other people, that just the slightly slower pace, maybe the slightly hunched over walk, that Pokemon Go, this mobile game, was changing the way in which people were using their bodies and changing the way in which people were moving through the cityscape. So, the impact of Pokemon Go, and this is kind of my final slide now. So, what can the use of the cityscape of Norwich tell us about the impact? Well, so first of all, I think there was a mainstreaming of geek culture. There was a sense that an increased visibility of geek culture. So, fanish practices are becoming increasingly more mainstreamed, and the comfort and ease with which players took to the city demonstrates that gaming and fanish activities are no longer niche. We only have to look upstairs and see how many people are here for the gaming festival to tell us that. So, I don't care what anybody says about it. I don't know what it says about us. Maybe we're all massive nerds. My friend said it best. 2016 will be remembered forever as the year that the nerds got a suntan. Rather drunkenly, when we were catching Pokemon, one of us announced, "We're the nerds. We've reclaimed the night." So people were going out and feeling safe to be nerds and playing this game in large groups. And there was also a sense of reclaiming public space and feeling safer in spaces like Castle Gardens, which, as I said, you may not have been felt safe to go there after dark before. Now it was overrun by Pokémon Go players. We were scampering around until like 2 a.m. Me and my friends, we've been having excuses to go on Pokemon dates and things like that. So we're going to go and tip some gyms together. Let's go out in a gang because it's night and it's dark, but we'll all have that kind of social experience together. But I think one of the things that was missing from my respondents was a question of the morality of using public spaces to play the game. Is it okay that people are taking over public spaces in this way to play a game like Pokemon Go? So my respondents tended to focus on the kind of the positive aspects of the game, like talking about how it improved day-to-day interactions between people. So one person said about, if you meet a stranger, it's kind of like you're both waiting at a bus stop and you've got something to talk about, or it's like the people who you meet on trains, like you meet on a train for a couple of hours and then you've got something to talk about. But no one really talked about things like this, about the morality, where the Holocaust Museum in the US asked players to stop playing. Can you stop playing Pokemon at this Holocaust Museum, please? Or the idea that business sponsors were taking money to be nominated as Pokestops. And I thought one of the reasons, might be for that is because citizens of Norwich may have felt a degree of ownership over their space, that we are citizens of Norwich, Norwich is our city, and we can kind of use it how we want. That these spaces had always been there, but they've just been waiting to be used. And I was kind of thinking about this just the other day about the use of outside City Hall, the kind of the uproar that met the skateboarders who were skating there in kind of 2014, 2015, and it became a kind of a big issue for the EDP. No one took issue with Pokemon Go players sitting on the War Memorial and playing the game, which I thought was a kind of really interesting distinction, that ostensibly an outside social activity, for one, was kind of thought of in different ways. And I kind of thought that nobody reflected on that, and that was interesting to me. So yeah, while I'm still working on charting the impact of Pokemon Go, but I think it provides an excellent example of the manner in which games can transform daily life and one's engagement with their landscape. And I think reflections on engagement with that landscape are still uneasy. People are not quite comfortable with augmented reality games yet. The idea that children might be kind of better off playing sport rather than kind of being glued to their phones, or the idea about kind of moral panics over players' safety was seemingly kind of omnipresent in the media at that time. And I think that conversations about the integration of technology in our day-to-day lives still make people uneasy. So yeah, I think there's still a lot to say about Pokemon Go, but hopefully this presentation kind of will give you some good memories of last summer, hopefully, but also make you reflect on your engagement with the technology and how it helps you in your daily life as well. So that's it. Thank you very much.